By the law of average, it won't happen. That phrase has destroyed 90% of my worries, and it has made the past 20 years of my life beautiful and peaceful beyond my highest expectation. General George Crook, probably the greatest Indian fighter in American history, say in his autobiography that nearly all the worries and unhappiness of the Indians came from their imagination and not from reality. As I look back across the decades, I can see that there is where most of my worries came from also. Jim Grant told me that had been his experience too. He owns the James, a grand distribution company, 204 Franklin Street, New York City. He orders from 10 to 15 carloads to Florida oranges and grapefruit at a time. He told me that he used to torture himself with such thought as, what if there's a train wreck? What if my fruit is strewn all over the countryside? What if a bridge collapses as my car are going across it? Of course, the fruit was insured, but he feared that if he didn't deliver his fruit on time, he might risk the loss of his market. He worried so much that he feared he had a stomach ulcer and went to a doctor. The doctor told him there was nothing wrong with him except jumpy nerve. I saw the light then, he said, and began to ask myself question. I said to myself, look here, Jim Grant, how many fruits car have you handled over the air? The answer was about 25,000. Then I asked myself, how many of those cars were ever wrecked? The answer was, oh, maybe five. Then I said to myself, only five out of 25,000. Do you know what that means? A ratio of 5 thousandths of one. In other words, by the law of average based on experience, the chances are 5 thousandths to an against of one of your cars ever being wrecked. So, what are you worried about? Then I said to myself, well, a bridge may collapse. Then I asked myself, how many cars have you actually lost from a bridge collapsing? The answer was none. Then I said to myself, aren't you a fool to be worrying yourself into stomach ulcers over a bridge which has never yet collapsed and over a railroad wreck when the chances are 5 thousands to 1 against it? When I look at it that way, Jim Grant told me, I felt pretty silly. I decided then and there to let the law of average do the worrying for me, and I have not been troubled with my stomach ulcer since. When Al Smith was governor of New York, I heard him answer the attacks of his political enemies by saying over and over, let's examine the record, let's examine the record. Then he proceeded to give the facts. The next time you and I are worrying about what may happen, let's take a tip from wise old Al Smith. Let's examine the record, see what basis there is, if any, for our going anxiety. There is precisely what Friedrich Mansfield did when he feared he was lying in his grave. Here is his story as he told it to one of our adult education classes in New York. Early June, Early in June 1944, I was lying in a slit trench near Omaha Bench. I was with the 999th Signal Service Company, and we had just dug in Normandy. As I look around at that slit trench, just a rectangular hole in the ground, I said to myself, this look just like a grave. When I lay down and tried to sleep in it, it felt like a grave. I couldn't help saying to myself, maybe this is my grave. When the German bombers began coming over at 11 p.m. and the bombs started falling, I was scared stiff. For the first 2 or 3 nights, I couldn't sleep at all. By the fourth or fifth night, I was almost a nervous wreck. I knew that if I didn't do something, I would go stark crazy. So I reminded myself that 5 nights had passed and I was still alive, and so was every man in our outfit. Only two had been injured, and they had been hurt not by German bombs but by falling flak from our own anti craft guns. I decided to stop worrying by doing something constructive, so I built a thick wooden roof over my slit trench to protect myself from flak. I thought of the vast area over which my unit was spread. I told myself that the only way I could be killed in that deep, narrow slit trench was by a direct hit. And I figured out that the chance of a direct hit on me was not 1 in 10,000. After a couple of nights of looking at it in this way, I calmed down and slept even through the bomb raids. The United States Navy used the statistics of the law of average to back up the morale of their men. One ex sailor told me that when he and his shipmates were assigned to high octane tanker, they were worried stiff. They all believed that if a tanker loaded with high octane gasoline was hit by a torpedo, it exploded and blew everybody to kingdom come. But the US Navy knew otherwise, so the Navy issued exact figure showing that out of the 100 tanker hit by torpedo, 60 stayed afloat, and of the 40 that did sink, only 5 sank in less than 10 minutes. That meant time to get off the ship. It also meant casualties were exceeding small. Did this help moral? This knowledge of the law of average wipe out my jitters? Sake light the blue mass of 1969, Walnut Street, Paul, Minnesota. The man who told this story, the whole crew felt better. We knew we had a chance, and that by the law of average, we probably wouldn't be killed. To break the worry habit before it breaks you, here is rule 3. Let's examine the record. Let's ask yourself, what are the chances according to the law of average that this event I am worrying about will ever occur? Chapter 9 cooperates with the inevitable. When I was a little boy, I was playing with some of my friends in the attic of an old, abandoned log house in northwest Missouri. As I climbed down out of the attic, I rested my feet on a window sill for a moment and then jumped. I had a ring on my left forefinger, and as I jumped, the ring caught on the nail head and tore off my finger. I screamed. I was terrified. I was positive I was going to die. But after the hand healed, I never worried about it for one split second. What would have been the use? I accepted the inevitable. Now often go for a month at a time without even thinking about the fact that I have only three fingers and a thumb on my left hand. A few years ago, I met a man who was running a freight elevator in one of the downtown office building in New York. I noticed that his left hand had been cut off at the wrist. I asked him if the loss of that hand bothered him. He said, "Oh no, I hardly ever think about it. I am not married, and the only time I ever think about it is when I try to thread a needle." It is astonishing how quickly we can accept almost any situation if we have to and adjust ourselves to it and forget about it. I often think of an inscription on the ruins of a 15th century cathedral in Armstrong, Holland. This inscription say in Flemish, "It is so, it cannot be otherwise." As you and I march across the decades of time, we are going to meet a lot of unpleasant situations that are so they cannot be otherwise. We have our choice. We can either accept them as inevitable and adjust ourselves to them, or we can ruin our lives with rebellion and maybe end up with a nervous breakdown. Here is a bit of sage advice from one of my favorite philosophers, William James. Be willing to have it so. He said, acceptance of what has happened in the first step to overcoming the consequences of any misfortune. Elizabeth Cornley of 2840 Annie 49th Avenue, Portland, Oregon, had to find that out the hard way. Here is a letter that she wrote me recently on the very day that America was celebrating the victory of our armed forces in North Africa. The letter say, "I received a telegram for the War Department. My nephew, the person I love most, was missing in action." A short time later, another telegram arrived saying he was dead. I was prostrate with grief. Up to that time, I had felt that life had been very good to me. I had a job I loved. I had helped to raise his nephew. He represented to me all that was fine and good in young manhood. I had felt that all the bread I had cast upon the water was coming back to me as cake. Then came this telegram. My whole world collapsed. I felt there was nothing left to live for. I neglected my work, neglected my friends. I let everything go. I was bitter and resentful. Why did my loving nephew have to be taken? Why did this good boy with life all before him, why did he have to be killed? I couldn't accept it. My grief was so overwhelming that I decided to give up my work and go away and hide myself in my tears and bitterness. I was clearly out my decks getting ready to quit when I came across a letter that I heard for getting a letter from his nephew who had been killed. A letter he had written to me when my mother had died a few years ago. Of course, we will miss her, the letter said, and especially you, but I know you'll carry on. Your own personal philosophy will make you do that. I shall never forget the beautiful truth you taught me. Wherever I am or how far apart we may be, I shall always remember that you taught me to smile and to take whatever comes like a man. I read and reread that letter. It seems as if he were there beside me, speaking to me. He seems to me saying to me, "Why don't you do what you taught me to do? Carry on no matter what happened. Hide your private sorrow under a smile and carry on." So I went back to my work. I stopped being bitter and rebellious. I kept saying to myself, "It is done. I can't change it, but I can and will carry on as He wished me to do." I threw all my mind and strength into my work. I wrote letters to soldiers, to other people, pupils boy. I join an adult education classes at night seeking out new interests and making new friends. I can hardly believe the change that has come over me. I have seized mourning over the past that is forever gone. I am living each day now with joy, just as my nephew would have wanted me to do. I have made peace with life. I have accepted my fate. I am now living a fuller and more complete life than I had ever known. Elizabeth Conley won out at Portland, Oregon, learned what all of us will have to learn sooner or later, namely that we must accept and cooperate with the inevitable. It is so, it cannot be otherwise. That is not an easy lesson to learn. Even kings on their thrones have to keep reminding themselves of it. The late George V had these framed words hanging on the wall of his library in Buckingham Palace: Teach me I neither to cry for the moon nor over spilt milk. The same through the same thought is expressed by Scoop Penhur in this way. A good supply of resignation is of the first importance of providing for the journey of life. Obviously, circumstances alone do not make us happy or unhappy. It is the way we react to circumstances that determines our feeling. Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven is within you. That is where the kingdom of hell is too. We can all endure disaster and tragedy and trump over them if we have to. We may not think we can, but we have surprisingly strong inner resources that will see us through if we will only make use of them. We are stronger than we think. The late Booth Tarkington always said, I could take anything that life could force upon me except one thing: blindness. I could never endure that. Then one day, when he was along in his 60s, Tarkington glanced down at the carpet on the floor. The color were blurred. He couldn't see the pattern. He went to a specialist. He learned the tragic truth. He was losing his sight. One eye was nearly blind, the other would follow. That which he feared most had come upon him. How did Turkington react to this word of all disaster? Did he fall? This is it. This is it. This is the end of my life. No, to his amazement, he felt quite gay. He even called upon his humor. Floating speck annoyed him. They would swim across his eyes and cut off his vision. Yet, when the largest of his speck would swim across his sight, he would say, Hello, there's grandfather again. Wonder there he going on his fine morning. When how could fate ever conquer a spirit like that? The answer is it couldn't. When the total blindness closed in, Tarkington said, I find I could take the loss of my eyesight just as a man can take anything else. If I lost all five of my senses, I know I could live on inside my mind. For it is in the mind we see and in the mind we live, whether we know it or not. In the hope of restoring his eyesight, Tarkington had to go through more than 12 operations within 1 year. With the local anesthetic, did he rail against this? He knew it had to be done. He knew he couldn't escape it, so the only way to lessen his suffering was to take it with grace. He refused to private room at the hospital and went into a ward where he could be with other people who could trouble too. He tried to cheer them up, and when he had to submit to repeated questions, fully conscious of what was being done to his eye, he tried to remember how fortunate he was, how wonderful, he said, how wonderful that science now has the skill to operate on anything so delicate as the human eye. The average man would have been a nervous wreck if he had had to endure more than 12 operations and blindness. Yet Tarkenton said, I would not exchange this experience for a happier one. It taught him acceptance. It taught him that nothing life could bring him was beyond his strength to endure it through. Taught him, as John Milton discovered, that it is not miserable to be blind, it is only miserable not to able to endure blindness. Margaret Fuller, the famous New England feminist, once offered as her credo, I accept the universe when grouchy old Thomas Carlyle heard that in England he snorted by gad, she'd better, yes, and by gad, you and I had better accepted the inevitable too. If we rail and kick against it and grow bitter, and we won't change the inevitable, but we will change ourselves. I know I have tried. I once ref- I once reuse I once refused to accept an inevitable situation with which I was confronted. I played the fool and railed against it and rebelled. I turned my nights into hell of insomnia. I brought upon myself everything I didn't want. Finally, after years of self torture, I had to accept what I knew from the outset I couldn't possibly alter. I should have cried out years ago with old Walt Whiteman. Oh, to confront night storms, hunger, ridicule, and accident rebirth as the trees and animals do. I spent 12 years working with cattle, yet I never saw a Jersey cow running a temperature because the pasture was burning up from a lack of rain, or because of sleet and cold, or because her boyfriend was paying too much attention to another heifer. The animal confront night storms and hunger calmly as they never have nervous breakdown or stomach ulcers. They never go insanely. And I'm advocating that we supply bow down to all the adversities that come our ways, not by as long shot there is mere fatalism, as long as there is a chance that we can save a situation, let fight. But when common sense tell us that we are up against something, this is so and cannot be otherwise than in the name of our sanity, let's not look before and after and pine for what is not. The late Dean Hawks of Columbia University told me that he had taken a Mother Goose reigns as one of his mottos. For, e- for every ailment under the sun, there is a remedy or there is a none. If there is one, try to find it. If there is none, never mind it. While writing this book, I interviewed a number of the leading businessmen of America, and I was impressed by the fact that they cooperated with the inevitable and lead lives singularly free from worry. If they hadn't done that, they would have cracked under the strain. Here are a few examples of what I mean. J.C. Penney, founder of the nationwide chain of penny stores, sang to me said to me, I wouldn't worry if I lost every cent I have because I don't see what is to be gained by worrying. I do the best job I possibly can and leave the rest in the laps of the gods. Henry Ford told me much of the same thing when I can't handle events. He said, I let them handle themselves. When I asked Katie Killer, president of the Chrysler Corporation, how he kept from worrying. He said, when I am up against a tough situation, if I can't do anything about it, I do it. If I can't, I just forget it. I never worry about the future because I knew no man living can possibly figure out what is going to happen in the future. There are so many people, there are so many forces that can will affect the future. Nobody can tell what prompt those forces or understand them, so why worry about them? Katie Killer would be embarrassed if you told him he is a philosopher. He is just a good businessman, yet he has stumbled on the same philosophy that Epictetus taught in Rome 19 centuries ago. There is only one way to happiness. Epictetus taught the Romans, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of your will. Bernard, the divine Sarah, was an illustrious example of a woman who knew how to cooperate with the inevitable for half a century. She had been reigning queen of the theatre on four continents, the best loved actress on earth. Then, when she was 71 and broke, she had almost her money. Her physician, Professor Posey of Paris, told her he would have to amputate her legs while crossing the Atlantic. She had fallen on deck during the storm and injured her leg severely. Phlebitis developed, her leg shrank. The pain became so intense that the doctor felt her leg had to be amputated. He was almost afraid to tell the stormy, tempestuous, divine Sarah what had to be done. He fully expected that the terrible news would set off an explosion of hysteria, but he was wrong. Sarah looked at him a moment and then said quietly, if it has to be, it has to be. It was fate. As she was being wheeled away to the operating room, her son stood weeping. She waved to him with a guy gesture and said cheerfully, don't go away. I'll be right back. On the way to the operating room, she recited a scene from one of the or her play. Someone asked her if she were doing this to cheer herself up. She said no, to cheer up the doctor and nurses. It will be a strain on them. After recovering from the operation, Sarah Burnett went on touring the world and enchanting audience for another 7 years. When we stop fighting the inevitable, said Elsie McCormick in a Reader Digest article, we release energy which enable us to create a richer life. No one living has enough emotion and vigor to fight the inevitable, at the same time enough left over to create a new life. Choose one of the other. You can either bend with the inevitable sleet storms of life, or you can resist them and break. I saw that happen on a farm I own in Missouri. I planted scores of trees on that farm. At first, they grew with astounding rapidity. Then, a sleet storm encrusted each twig and branch with a heavy coating of ice. Instead of bowing gracefully to their burden, these trees proudly resisted and broke and split under the load and had to be destroyed. They hadn't learned the wisdom of the forests of the north. I have traveled hundreds of miles through the evergreen forests of Canada, yet I have never seen a spurs or a spine broke by a slit of ice. These evergreen forests, how n- these evergreen forests now how to bend, how to bow down their branches, how to cooperate with the inevitable. The masters of Jiu-Jitsu teach their pupils to bend like the willow, don't resist like the oak. Why do you think your automobile tires stand up on the road and take so much punishment? At first, the manufacturing tried to make a tire that would resist the shock of the road. It was soon cut to ribbon. They made a tire that would absorb the shock of the road. That tire would take it. You and I will last longer and enjoy smoother riding if we learn to absorb the shocks and jolts along the rocky road of life.